maternity leave is short because they're like, I've calculated how much money I am going to lose by not having you in the office, or how much it'll cost me to hire somebody else to do the work that you have to do.
And so what I need is for you as my partner and you as my community to respect that that is the most important job in the world and treat me accordingly.
And I think there's a lot to be said for who we are choosing, because when the clock is ticking, for a lot of women, reason and logic goes out of the window. And all we're thinking about is, I need a mini-me. There's a problem.
Hi neighbors, welcome to Stories Next Door. I'm your host, JEICY Joyce, and today I'll be wearing the hat of a moderator for this special Women's History Month conversation. Here on Stories Next Door, we believe in creating space for real, honest and thought-provoking conversations. This is not a debate, it's a dialogue, a chance to listen, to understand and to explore the stories behind the perspectives. Today we are diving into a conversation that many of us have thought about but rarely get the chance to discuss openly. We'll be exploring the challenges, expectations, and evolving roles of women in today's world through career, family, identity, and beyond. Our guests bring different perspectives, values, and viewpoints to the table. And while we may not always see things the same way, there's a power in simply hearing each other out. This is about connecting, not competition, reflection, not judgment. So I invite you to lean in, keep an open mind, and join us as we navigate these stories together. With that said, let's meet our guests.
Hi neighbors, my name is Shanoa.
I am Pidal Tampa.
My name is Lynn Lioba.
I am a creative seer, psychologist by trade, healer by nature.
I am an integrative well-being coach, a theatre practitioner and teacher and performer.
I am a lawyer by profession, an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, and a creative by heart.
I'm 40 years old.
I'm 40 years old.
I'm 32 years old.
Society is too focused on empowering women and not enough on holding men accountable. Okay, I'll start with the disagreeer. Why do you disagree?
So I disagree on the intricacies. In that, if you empower women, I think a automatic kind of thing that will happen by virtue of them being empowered is that men will be held accountable. So yeah, I think there could be more balance, but I think when you empower women to use their voice, to feel comfortable in their own skin, etc., by virtue of that happening, they'll hold men accountable.
Okay, you agreed on the prompt. What do you think?
Yeah, I can see your point. And also I think there's a rate at which empowerment of women is taking place, and the sections of life and culture in which it happens, where we're looking at the empowerment of women, but we're not looking at the power dynamics of males and females when that empowerment is happening. And so what's happening is we end up in this tussle of, we've got males who say, I'm a feminist and I believe in feminism, but haven't really learned what that means for them. And so in a workspace, for example, you believe in feminism until, because we haven't looked at the intricacies of things. And I think that happens as well in terms of culture, religion. I think there's a point at which empowerment of women feels like something that we're all on board with until. So for example, in terms of culture, we can say that I was encouraged to be educated. And it was like, you've got to get out there, you've got to be educated, you've got to stand on your own 2 feet, you've got to have a strong voice. And it's like, I do, you're right. And I've done that. However, at home, in the household, in the family, in the community, is that 2 feet standing on your own with that strong voice still valuable, respected, wanted? Is there space made for it? Actually, it's squashed. You know, I stood at a bus stop about 3 years after graduating from university, and I had my very older cousin's friend say to me, "Oh, you're so-and-so's daughter. You finished school, didn't you?" "Yeah." "Don't worry, I'll speak to your dad, I'll marry you." I was empowered. I was encouraged to be, you know, to study and to go into the workplace, but that's up to a point. And then at that point, we shift over to the male perspective again. And that's where I think that there's a misalignment. I think there's a certain level of agreement, but then it's like, then we shift back into the traditional and you're supposed to be quiet and subdued again.
Yeah, you wanted to add something.
Yeah, but I think that is to do with the dynamic that a lot of people, we are conditioned as women as well, to view women as objects to be held, possessed and had, as opposed to actual whole people. And so when you have that dynamic of, okay, you can be empowered because when I now capture you, you're more shiny, you're more accomplished.
What is it when they say men want a free bird to cage it?
I've not heard that one.
Yeah, but I agree with what you're saying. I think the empowerment of women and the accountability of men are two separate things, personally. Because A, who is empowering women, right? And what was the point of empowering women? We were trying to achieve some form of equality because, you know, society had, quote unquote, like left us behind. Women were not allowed to go to school historically. Women weren't even allowed to have bank accounts, right? So by empowering women, by allowing them to go to school, quote unquote, or like allowing them to have opinions, and I use allow very loosely because, but that's exactly what they were doing. They were allowing us into spaces. So women took it back and we're like, okay, we're gonna ensure that women go to school. Women are able to do particular things. And then when we talk about male holding men accountable, why is it always women that have to do everything, right? Women are empowered, we're empowering ourselves. And then you say, oh, but we're leaving the quote unquote boy child behind. No, but also men can also empower their men, can also teach them how to be upstanding members of society and hold each other accountable, right? If you see something, you say something. If your friend is acting some type of way, you as a man should also be like, okay, I believe in X amount of values and what you're doing is not supposed to be what we're supposed to do. So they're separate. It's not equal. Women can be empowered, but that does not mean that we're holding men accountable. We have to hold men accountable in a completely separate space. Yeah.
I don't know.
Do you just want to add on that and expand more?
Controversial, but I also wonder about the whole question of empowerment. And as you said, who is empowering? Empowering is a very tricky word anyway, because it already suggests the subtext is a power dynamic. So if we go into that, the subtext says that whoever's holding the power is offering
exactly
or sharing power.
Exactly.
Right? Which means essentially I'm reliant on the male contingent to give me. The same goes with race and other things as well. So effectively, there is an accountability question in there, because if I am the one empowering you, because women will say, we're empowering ourselves, we're still working within a it's still a patriarchal framework. Yeah. So it's still a sort of divvying up of power. And I'm going to give you like 20% because I like you. I like what you do. But what you do somehow feeds into what I want. That's how power works. I'm not just giving it to you because I believe in your cause. No, there's something about what you're doing that's going to keep me in power, empowered.
Actually it's interesting when you think about that, because at the turn of the century, right, they needed women to join the workforce, right? Not because we were seen as people who were valuable to society. No, they actually just needed the manpower. So suddenly we are needed by society, and that's where the empowerment comes from. It's like, oh, okay, there's a value proposition that's being offered here to whatever patriarchy or capitalism. And now suddenly, actually, we require women to work because we can no longer make sure that we can sustain ourselves, let's say one income household. For example, we need women to work because we need to push a certain agenda, whatever you want to call it. We want to push capitalism, we want to push, but women are required now to participate. And because of that participation is the allowing.
And this is why I think there is an accountability question, because it goes back to the rate of progress or development, depending on the word you want to use, because I don't think that there was a real clear vision of what it would look like. There definitely wasn't with the war. They suddenly had this like whole group of women who had all these skills and they wanted to be out there. And then the men came back and they were like, oh, damn, these people want to be out there, but like our guys need these jobs. So I don't think they've always factored in that we're always factoring in what the ramifications of these empowering acts are and the sharing of power. So then you end up on this, in this context that looks kind of foreign, also looks a little bit threatening to self. So the accountability bit is, what are you going to do when this doesn't look how you want it to look? What are you going to do when the power that you've shared is now, it's building? It's like gremlins, Furbies, like water's being poured in it, and there's more and more women feeling like we're going to help each other out, we're going to do this, we're going to get together. And now you're like, damn, I only gave power to one woman, and now she's shared it and she's, you know, watered the seeds and now it's bigger. And that's the accountability bit. It's the bit where you kind of sit back and you go, okay, the landscape has changed. How do I change to either meet it or to adapt it in the ways that work? And is that adaptation or change for the greater good, or is it for mine? I think we're at that question.
I think we're exactly at that point where it's threatening that maybe the pot is not big enough for everybody, quote unquote. Like there's a feeling.
It's very capitalist heavy though.
You know, like the pot might not be big enough for all these women who are empowered, who are educated, who have degrees.
There's only 5 bits of meat
Exactly.
in there, and the rest is
the only
stew.
5,000, top 5,000 companies.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
How can we divvy up to all these?
But then I think what you're saying, I agree with it, but I think it is, and in terms of what you're saying as well, it ties into this very Western, very capitalist heavy perspective. However, when you think traditionally, when we were talking before about African cultures and traditional cultures, whereby actually the sky is big enough for whatever birds it wants to contain, I think when you step away, and there's this anecdotal story where it talks about when someone is going off the rails, the village gathers and they call them by their name and they remind them of who they are. That is empowerment as well. And I think there is this dynamic, just by virtue of being people, we have power. Whether that power is regarded, acknowledged, made space for, it exists. Yes. So I think another side of the coin is actually, we're not necessarily asking for permission or getting involved in that dynamic, but just reawakening to what already exists.
What is my power and how do I use it?
Rather than saying, can I have space here, please? Can you hold space for me as the man? And actually, my friend, as women, if it weren't for us, where would we be? You know?
Yeah. There's too much separation, I think, in the conversation around accountability and empowerment, in that I think what tends to happen is that men are having the conversation in their space and women are having it in their space, and there's this sort of like me against you-ness, and it's like, no, actually it gets better when we come together and we look at the problems collectively in community and we say, right, okay, you seem to want it to go this way. I really want it to go this way.
Where can we find,
where
can we see each other?
Yes, exactly.
On the same level.
Yeah.
We occupy different, I don't want to get into like gender roles, but we occupy different functions. Even if we strip it away to think about just naturally, men and women, we do different things. And so surely there is space for everybody to occupy their function and their power, so much so that we benefit society as... your face, what are you going to say?
Sorry, my face firstly does not lie. I'm really sorry, my face doesn't lie. It's just that like traditional women would say that in a traditional sense, holding your place as a traditional woman is you taking your power, right? Which is kind of, condescending because me in a traditional space, and I'm not saying all traditional women, but in this traditional space, women holding their power is them holding it in this specific way as mother, as head of household, as the person who does specific roles within the household, that is then understood as holding your power, but it's not the same.
So for women who want to come outside of that box, I don't think there's a problem. But for women who want to occupy that space and occupy it fully, do you think that's problematic?
Occupy it fully in that you want to be, I don't want to use that word, but you want to be a traditional wife?
I think if that is something that a woman chooses, rather than something that someone imposes upon her and says, you can't go to school because all you're going to be is a traditional wife. You cannot work because your function is to... If a woman says, I want to be the cornerstone of my family, to raise my children, my husband is working to the extent that he provides financially, I don't have to go out and engage in toxic workplaces.
Okay. There are levels. So, minors...
I'm loving this, okay?
Minors cannot consent, right? So, let's just start there. Listen, so if you want to take it like from the beginning, children should go to school, right? Everybody should get an education. So in the context of, oh no, we're preventing women from going to school, etc., yes, that's bad, right? So once a woman gets an education and sees the world and has a choice, and they make that choice, fair and fine. That choice, however, has to be acknowledged that there's a lot of room for abuse, right? In that, if you're not sure about the situation, you have no financial understanding, or you don't know how your household is run, you have no savings, things happen, right? So in that,
but that's not tradition. I would argue that is not tradition. Abuse is abuse. Traditional housewife role is a traditional. It doesn't.
And that's why I said it leaves
automatically
a lot of room.
Equate.
I didn't say it does equals to. I said it leaves room for. So there has to be a lot of understanding and a lot of knowledge if that's the choice you want to make, but you have to make it from an informed point of view and not just, oh, I want to be a traditional wife.
Oh no, I think the assumption
curveball here, yeah, because I think we're at risk, or we're already in that place where we have consumed a notion that one way is the right way. And I believe that there is a certain level of power and empowerment in a woman being the cornerstone of the family. And do you know what? I'll just tell you straight. I believe that a woman is the cornerstone, is the heart anyway of any family. I think in terms of our natural energy and nature, generally speaking, obviously people are made in different ways, but generally speaking, we are. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. In a heterosexual canon, I think male and female energy work differently. And I think that's been designed for specific reasons, and we need to work with that rather than against it. The issue that I have in terms of traditional roles is that if we decide, that my role is to be a traditional woman, in the sense that I am not a working woman, I'll use it that way, not a working woman outside of the home, my main function is to be partner and mother. The house is my kingdom, queendom.
Yeah. Go on.
There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. The biggest and most important job in the world is raising children.
Agreed.
And so what I need is for you as my partner and you as my community to respect that that is the most important job in the world and treat me accordingly. Do not look at me as less than you, because that's what I'm doing. There is no future without what I'm doing. And part of what we're having at the moment as an issue in terms of young people's education, I'm not talking about academic education, but I'm talking about social, communal, spiritual, is that there is an absence of parents at home because everybody has to work all the hours. And so there's elements of parenting in terms of presence that's missing. And so there's a lot of young people that are walking around with less than what we got. And even when we were coming up, there was already a struggle with time and being able to give. So I don't see that if a woman decides to stay at home, that's in any way negative or that's in any way less powerful. I think the issue is more about perception and the way that that woman is treated or women are treated. I, as a, whatever century we're in, what century are we in?
20th, 21st?
We're still in the 21st. Jesus!
Been here a minute.
It's been a long time. Since primary school, we've been in the 21st century. Well, it is 100 years, so I suppose that makes sense. But I feel like as a woman who's still in childbearing age, I feel at a loss that I have to make the choice as to whether to stay home or go to work. I feel at a loss that maternity leave is so tight that if I decide to stay home for a year, that's already me having to negotiate really carefully my contract. But it's actually better for the child in terms of development if I'm with them more. And that's no judgment to women who want to go back early. But it's just, the system has moved so quickly that we've also started to forget about those nurturing things that are really important. It's not just about money and economics. Everything is based on money and economics. Well-being is kind of being tossed out the window. Because I'll have a child and I'll have to rush back to work. Like, what is that?
Yeah. I remember reading a post recently, and this couple decided that the lady would stay home, look after the baby, but then it was like, money's tight, you need to go back to work. And so she's having anxiety, and the husband says, I'll give you some money to get some therapy for the anxiety. And I'm reading it, and I'm like, but that is a real natural response to the circumstances that you are facing. But the space as women to say, I have separation anxiety from this new person that I've birthed, that is an issue. And I think when we talk about accountability, I think one of my main gripes is how pervasive the attitudes of some men are, in the sense of they're not held accountable to the extent of, look at this woman, see that she functions differently from you, and make space for it. Absolutely. Understand it. You've agreed to raise a family and procreate with this person, but you have no idea of how a woman's body works. Yeah. You have no idea of the woman's psyche, like her emotional, like that is my issue with the accountability part.
Okay, well, this conversation, very passionate, leads us greatly into our next prompt, and that is, women feel pressured to do it all, excel at work, maintain a household, and be caregivers. Okay, everyone agrees.
The silence as well. It's like,
okay. You don't even want to agree, but you're like, you know what?
Yeah. Let's start with you, Chanel.
I think it's a hard topic to address, purely because I'm living it. Do you know what I mean? It's not some theoretical thing that is happening afar off. There are emotions involved, and my thing is, again, often I am going through things, and it's almost like I'm looked at, especially like with my family dynamic and different things, I'm looked at as the strong one. And it's like, hold on, I'm a person. I'm not a resource. I have feelings about this thing that is occurring. Can that be seen, please? Please. But I think looking at things like going through, during COVID 2021, I was studying my master's. I was a carer for one of my relatives. I developed this feeling of not feeling safe in my own body. But my job still had to be attended to. My deadlines for the masters still had to be met. The person that I was caring for, I still had to cook their meals. And at the end of it, I got to a place where I said, I don't feel safe. I don't feel safe in my own body. So Yes, I feel like those pressures are very real, very salient, because I think we came out of 2021, came out of lockdown, and it's like back to business as usual. Actually, the psychological ramifications of not being able to go outside and be free, having to wonder, did someone touch this thing that I'm about to touch? Did someone cough in my direction? What are the implications of that? Let me go and be hyper vigilant and now go and wash my... That doesn't evaporate now that we're in 2025, you know? The human body is not designed to sustain stress and pressure for any long period of time. And so, yeah, I could go on about this all day. But yes, it's real.
Peter, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I think there's a default mechanism where women become carers in all contexts, and not just as adults. It's from young. So I don't know about you, but I've been a carer. I've been co-parenting with my mother since I was a kid, and explicitly, not implicitly. I started cooking at the age of 5, which I don't regret. I'm really glad that the lady did me right. She started teaching me from 5 in the kitchen, cooking together. But the language around that was to be able to take care of the family. And it's fascinating to me because I didn't explicitly see any trainings for my brothers to be able to take care of the family. Whereas I had very practical, functional things that I had to learn for that purpose. And it's like, if we're talking again in heterosexual terms, there's 2 parents in the household, and they're male-female, then surely we should both be training from the age of 5 all the way up.
Taking turns cooking.
There's a very explicit message being sent there about my role. And I feel like that's the whole way through, whether it's a 2-parent household or not, that girls are conditioned to be carers and to look after in so many contexts. And so in situations like COVID, there's an imbalance of who's doing the caretaking. I think the way that boys are socialized, the way that men are socialized around emotions and talking is also problematic. I think maybe in some cases we're going a little bit too far with what's going on the internet, but generally speaking, boys and men are gradually discouraged from expressing emotion and identifying emotion and sharing. And so a female in the household or in the environment, the workplace, is actually a really useful resource because generally she does express. So she becomes the conduit for what you can't say, for what you can't do. It's really useful for you. That's a real positive for you. But for me, I've got my stuff and I've also got your stuff. So everything that you're not speaking about, everything that you're not exorcising from your system, from your spirit, you're carrying. And then that weight very often gets transferred somehow. So then I'm carrying mine, I'm carrying yours, but I'm also trying to encourage you. That's work. We have a lot of work that we're doing that we haven't asked for, unpaid, unseen, uncategorized labor. It's just labor. And so I think that's part of what causes our exhaustion. I think I know it's also a big part of what creates our mental and physiological health issues, particularly for Black women and fibroids, and what stress does, and the chemical imbalances and things. And it's just like we swallow these things and we move on. People talk about having period pains and things like that. These things are not normal, and they're exacerbated by things like stress. And we're constantly absorbing, and all of that energy is in our bodies, and it's changing our makeup on a cellular level. This is like, whether you want to talk about it from a spiritual standpoint, an emotional standpoint, or a physiological standpoint, it's counterproductive for our health. So we need to adjust the culture of the way that we socialize our men and boys so that they are better equipped with the language and the tools to handle more of their stuff. I think it's important that we stay in relationship with these things. I don't think there should be a separation. However, they need more. It can't just be us all the time.
All the time.
Lynn, is there something that you'd like to add on that?
Yes. I'd like to start by saying that we're all victims of capitalism, right? So we have no choice in any of this. We have to participate in order to feed our families, to sustain ourselves, to be able to be housed, to be dressed. So I agree when you say that there's a lot of unseen, unpaid value that women put on the table that is taken for granted. And I think that value, that work needs to be redistributed, actually. I think that if we're going to be able to make it work, some of that work has to shift, right? Off of women's table onto the partner. There's a lot of, and again, it goes back to accountability, right? We're not holding men accountable for lack of emotional labor that you do or lack of physical actual labor that you might do in the household. And we need to be able to redistribute that work in order for us to be less stressed, because as women, we are at a higher rate of stress than men because of all the work that we do. And it's also, like you said, unseen. In the workplace, you are the caregiver to your coworkers. You're just absorbing, and that takes a toll on your body. So yeah, it's a lot of pressure to be seen as everything. You want to be a mother, you want to be a sister, you want to be a friend, you want to be a partner, you want to be an employee. There's so many roles that you have to play all at the same time, and I just think it is not fair for women. And at some point, it's like it just has to. We have to share the work. That's the only solution.
But I would think as well, another dynamic, we're black women. And so whilst we carry this burden and this weight that all women experience, as black women, when we show up in spaces, there's this equal burden of, you're strong and you can take, let me come and unburden on you. And it's like, hold on.
Yeah.
We carry a sense of knowing, we carry a sense of nurturing. I think about the whole mitochondrial Eve, and it's like, okay, people look at us and it's like, oh, you are the epitome of woman. But actually, we still need the spaces where we can be soft, where we can break down, where we can be safe to do all these things that are part of our humanity. And oftentimes we don't have safe spaces to do that stuff. And it adds to the pressure to, even if you are not okay, you still have to show up as if
Everything is okay. Yeah. I think we have to get to a point where we have to let things break. So my sister, she's young, and she was the one telling me, she's like, let it break. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You can't always be the one making sure that everybody's okay, that, we all come together for Christmas, we all doing this, we all cook, we all clean, we're all happy. Let it break. And
There's
if
a
it
real
goes...
fear about that.
Exactly. They're so scared of just relinquishing the quote-unquote control, but it has to reach a point where we just let it break. And if that means society as a whole breaks down, then yeah, okay, we start again, because clearly it's not working. We can't always just be taking on the burden. Let it break. Let's see what happens.
Do you know, I wonder if there is
Release
something
it.
in that is, that stems from a kind of like ancestral trauma or an ancestral wisdom, in that the possibilities of what happens when it breaks are so catastrophic. Like what we've inherited genetically as knowledge in our bodies, in our spirits, is so catastrophic that we just can't allow for it. There's, that allowing the space to be what it's going to be, and not leaving, being present with it, is a really, really difficult thing. It's a really difficult thing, and it takes a lot of unlearning. But the unlearning is not individual, it's communal. For me to allow for that to happen, as I do so, you're going to be looking at me like, so you're not going to do the thing that you always do. And you will get 7 different phone calls from different people. Hey, are you not doing the thing? Wait, but you always do the thing.
Why aren't you doing the thing?
Aren't you doing the thing? Hey,
are you
I heard
okay?
you're not doing the thing.
Exactly.
Do the thing, man. It's your role. And it's requiring me to break down what you perceive me as, but also for you to then come to terms with there's a grief in that. you not doing the thing. There's my grief in that.
Yes. Letting
And
go
there's
of being
your
that
grief.
person
Yes.
that is always that thing, but it has to be relinquished because, like I said, share, because it's too much. It's overbearing and it's not healthy.
But when you look at it, is there change, like what our parents experience, for instance, and what we are currently experiencing, what our children would experience? Is there any shift in dynamic?
I believe so. I would have, my mum, God bless her, she passed in November of last year, but I remember having a conversation with her and it was around family dynamics. And because I'm the psychologist, it's like, oh, you know better. So she said to me at one point, when so-and-so behaves badly and so-and-so behaves badly, you should just accommodate them because you know better. And I paused and I said, okay, in this moment, I don't want to be disrespectful, but equally, this doesn't feel emotionally safe. And so my response was, I appreciate that for you. My mum sacrificed so much in where she was. She was the eldest daughter, so she had a lot of stuff.
That's a podcast.
That's another one.
But I remember saying to her, you chose to do that. I am not a martyr.
Yes.
And I cannot sacrifice and self-abandon to the extent that I'm a shell of who I know I am supposed to be. And so why are you not doing that thing? The thing that I'm not coming. Sorry, what? I'm not coming. It takes me an hour to get there and an hour to go home. I'm not coming. And there were tantrums and there were breakings and there were meltdowns. And for me, there were internal fears like, if I don't do this thing, am I still valuable in this family context? And for sometimes there were points where I wasn't phoned and said, how are you? Just because people knew you can't caution her and tell her, oh, so-and-so is this, can you go and make one of your specialties? And no, I'm not okay myself, I'm not doing it. So I lost value in that context until I chiseled out essentially a new identity within that context, maintained my boundaries so everybody was able to have the tantrums and recover and come back and say, okay, things have shifted. So we all need to shift.
It's an intentional creating of a space for yourself.
Yes.
You have to create that space for yourself where you hold your boundaries. It's like, I know you want me to be this thing. It's so uncomfortable. Even for yourself, you're like, I am this person 100% and I will do it literally almost till my hair falls out. But I have to hold this space for me. And I have to I have to give myself care. I have to give myself kindness. I have to allow myself this space that nobody else is allowing for me. Because also at the end, everybody will see you as a martyr, but then they won't come and save you.
What's that
So you have to
Zora
save
Neale
yourself.
Hurston? They'll kill you.
And say you enjoyed it or something.
There's like an educational end to it as well, in that people learn to love you the way that you teach people how to love you. So the unlearning is theirs as well. There's like it's two-sided. You need to set those boundaries and hold those boundaries and sit in that discomfort, and so do they, until you learn a new way of interacting, or you part. And I think our fear is the loss of the relationship completely, rather than us leaning into the possibilities of deconstructing, and then reconstructing a new relationship that serves us better.
But sometimes that deconstruction does mean that it will never recover.
Yes.
And you have
so
to
be
be
it.
okay with that.
Which is I'm saying, right, so be it. Like, it's so easy. Yeah, bye. It's not. But in terms of our well-being, we need that. We need to be able to. And also, I think oftentimes with people who are used to accessing us and our resources in a specific way, it requires that level of jeopardy. I might lose you if I don't. And then they're like, wait, what is the thing I have to do to not lose you? But until you really hold the boundary, they're never going to get to that point where the question is internal. It's always going to be you, I need you to, I need it. And that just, boop, 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 boop. It needs to be their own internal process of, wait, she's not picking up the phone, or she's not coming over. Or, wait, she's not just, but I do, in terms of the question that you asked, is it shifting with our parents and generations, thank you. Yes, I would say I went from that, really specific, back like a dog. I was up in the gold dress, like I was, woo, whoa. I was trained to be a wife, trained to be a mother. And I think it was in my early 30s, I was having a conversation with my mum, and I can't remember what it was about, but the thing that sticks out for me and stayed with me is she said something to me, and I said something about my siblings and needing to be there for them. And she just stopped and she was very still. And she said to me, "Are you going to live your whole life for your siblings?"
That one here. Mm-hmm.
Oh, God. Even now, like, it hit. Because, my instant response wants to be no. But at the same time, I'm realizing that all my behavioral patterns are very much about other people. I'm at the back of my own line. And then B, the person that's saying it to me is part of the system that indoctrinated me to actually behave this way in the first place. So she's doing a decoding process where she's watching me live through my life. And she's like, girl, you're doing too much. And she's probably thought, oh God, I think we did that lesson for too long. It's like, she went to school on that. She's getting A stars and we need her to be like at a C level now. Like, bring it down, girl, bring it down. And, but it was such an interesting dynamic for the two of us, mother and daughter, to be sat there. And suddenly she's basically saying, forget those people. Leave it. Yeah. Forget those people, my other children. Go do you. So I think it is changing. And I think they're seeing the climate, the system that we're operating in also is different to back home. Where culture and structures support a different kind of communal behavior and interaction compared to here, which is very individuated. So I think the answer is yes to that.
Yeah, I think there was a bunch of self-abandonment for that generation, whereas now the question that is being thrown up is, can you honour others as you honour yourself? You have to get to that shift, and I think that shift is happening.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, moving on to our next prompt. I'm enjoying this conversation. Honestly, I'm on the receiving end. I'm like, oh wow, there's that. So I am having a good time. The next prompt is: men should have a say in reproductive rights for women. Okay, let's start with you, Lynn.
This is going to be controversial, unfortunately. Yes, my point is yes and no, right? In a holistic partnership, if this point comes, then yes, a conversation should be had, right? All the options should be considered, but ultimately it's the woman who's going to go through everything herself. So the choice inherently should lie with her if she wants, because it's risking your life to have a child. It's not just waking up in the morning and going and doing a thing and coming back. No, you're literally risking your life going through this. So in a holistic situation where you have a partner and you can agree, fine. From a societal point of view, absolutely not. If you're a man and you're sitting in a legislature somewhere and you just don't even know where a uterus is, please do not have anything to say about women's reproductive, anything at all. Period. Like, it's not even, I have nothing else to say. Just don't have any opinion.
Just on that note, do you think it's being treated more of a political issue now than a medical one?
I think so. I think it's playing politics to conservative versus more liberal people. There's a lot of, I don't know how to say it, but like global politics as well. Like, are there enough children kind of situation going on? Especially living in the West, it's like are there enough children situation? So it's really taking away women's agency for choice. Because there are women who want to have 9 children. That's fine, 100%. Do what you want to do, but it shouldn't be your choice sitting in an office somewhere. You've never had a period, you've never carried a child, and suddenly you are the arbiter and decide whether somebody lives or dies. I think that it should not happen.
Yeah. You went with yes. What are your opinions on that?
I think that this is another topic where our perception is so skewed because reproduction seems to be an issue for women, a women's issue. And it's like, in the sense that we carry the child, yes, but there is no reproduction without the other. Like, it requires both. And therefore, both should have a voice in it in different ways. And also, I think in terms of reproductive rights, we look at things like reproductive rights also talks about contraception. And if we say that this is, the perception around that in itself is skewed as well, because contraception, again, is often looked at what the woman needs to do. And we know that years ago when they were developing contraception, there were pills being investigated and experimented around the idea for men to have pills that they could take. And from what I understand, from what I've looked at, it was the risks, the hormonal risks and the changes in mood and this and that, and it was too much. Like, men were gonna go crazy taking these pills.
Yes. I know. A pause.
Exactly.
This is where we need to be at the table, all of us, because it's like, if it's okay for me to experiment with pills from when I start puberty or partway through because I've got cramps and the doctor says, take this pill, it'll help you with that. Take that pill, it'll help with the fibroids, whatever. And also take this one for your spots. And these are all contraceptive pills that women kind of experiment with to figure out what's going to work for their body. And they have all these different reactions and responses that then make them behave in certain ways in society, that makes them look a certain way and be perceived a certain way. If men are not part of that conversation, they don't understand what the heck is going on.
Very true.
They already don't know what's going on. And then we're plugging ourselves with pills and all sorts. Most men don't know that they have contraception available for them to use. It's just, there's so many forms of contraception. And we sort of talk about two. And most of those contraceptions are things that adjust the chemical balances of a woman's body. And I just think, I think it's an issue of education, there being more parity in education around these things for men and women, and for us to stop looking at reproduction as a woman's issue. It isn't. And also, when we talk about reproductive rights, we're also talking about fertility. There's so much pressure on women to come out of the workplace because they are reaching a certain age and they haven't had children yet. We don't talk about the fact that men reach a certain age, and even though they're still producing sperm, the quality does decrease. So actually, in terms of fertility, you should be talking as well. Because maybe the reason we're not making a baby is because
It's not doing what it's supposed to do.
but you don't talk about it in your community, and we don't talk about your reproductive systems and your reproductive health. We only talk about mine. And so all these laws that are being passed are laws on my body, my reproductive rights. We're not talking about yours. Like, what is that? I can't make a baby without you. So you've got to be at the table. We've got to be talking about both sides. And I think when we start having a more equally balanced conversation around all of these things, and when we start looking, even in terms of, it's not even good sex education that we get in schools, but when we look at that, there's quite a lot of balance towards the woman and what happens in her body. Boys don't know what the heck happens to them. They don't know. They just have all these situations like, I did mad. And then, you know how they talk to each other. Sorry. And they don't get that education. So by the time they're coming into any kind of sexual contact with another person, with a female, they're in the wilderness and they want to teach you. They want to teach us. I don't need to be. I don't need to be taught by you because you don't know what you're saying.
I agree. I know I've said it multiple times, but this idea that women are people, the disregard for how a woman's body functions overall is astounding. Wow. The amount of men that just, I remember having another post on social media, and this guy was like, oh, I asked this girl out and she said she's in her luteal phase, so I should come back when she's in her follicular stages. What is that? And it's like, a lot of these men unfortunately have no idea how a woman's bodies function, but still somehow want access. How, sweet? How? You want to tell women how they should be using their bodies, but you don't know how. The bemusement is much. So on that level, no. But when you get to I think the crux of the matter, and you're talking about, okay, a woman has become pregnant, does a man get a say? I feel like there should be some discussion. But then equally, when we're talking about that, I'm thinking accountability-wise, sir, you know that if you plant a seed in soil, typically at some point it's going to grow. So why do you continually go around planting your seed in places that you don't want it to grow? It's highly problematic. Highly.
Because you don't know what the hell you're doing. That's why.
And I also think we have to remove womanhood has to be separated from motherhood. Exactly. Like, we as women are women holistically outside our ability to have children.
Or inability.
Exactly. And it should be a choice. If you're a teen and, you want to continue the rest of your life and, something happens and now you have to make a choice, you are allowed to make a choice that benefits you as a holistic human, rather than just this idea that women should just reproduce, we should just carry, we should just be incubators for the cradle of mankind. No, I am a person. I also don't want to change diapers all the time. I don't want, I should have a choice. That should be a choice that women should have.
Yeah. There's something in what you've both said that brings me back to the workplace as well, and also to the educational systems that we have, because reproductive rights also impact the 7-day working week, the how productive I am across the month and how productive I'm not. And how some countries give days off for periods and many don't. It affects things like maternity leave, which affects the workforce. How much time can I get off? How much time am I allowed in terms of bereavement if I've miscarried?
But it's also about value, right? It goes back to how society views the value that we produce either in the workplace or the value that we give in terms of children, right? Maternity leave is short because they're like, I've calculated how much money I am going to lose by not having you in the office, or how much it'll cost me to hire somebody else to do the work that you have to do. That's the calculation.
And that's
not
why
welfare.
We need to be in conversation together, because
Exactly.
that is impacting my right to produce or not to produce.
Right.
Because I'm now calculating how much is my rent, how much do I have to pay for fuel, how much is my Oyster card a week. Instead of, but also equally, I'm deciding with my partner that maybe next year, babe. Maybe next year. Wait, let's look at childcare. We can't pay for this and get this, and then it's like, oh, we should both go back to work and then pay for childcare. What? Wait. Go to work to pay for someone to take as I'm being forced to do that, not by choice but the circumstance. And in there's something really twisted as well, because I wanted to stay home.
You should have the option to stay home.
But the situation, so there's so much in it, and I think to exclude men from that conversation is, to do it the way we've been doing it is what's brought us to this place. And I think that the male contingent need to have a greater understanding of how it impacts all of these facets. And not just, I think very often when we talk about reproductive rights, we go straight to abortion. And it's like, that's a really complex issue.
Exactly.
But it's all the other stuff as well. It's my understanding It's whether in my community and in my school, we talk about what a period is, or whether I'm going to wake up one day with blood and I'm going to be like, hey, what is this? And then no one wants to tell me what it is. That's an issue, because then I'm panicking and I think I'm dirty, whether I don't get to go to school because I'm on my period.
It's also
There's
things
all
like
of those things.
Safety in terms of diseases that can be that is also a conversation. It's not only extreme, abortion, whether a woman can have an abortion or not. That's a whole different conversation.
That's a whole different...
and it's so deep, and like, yes, okay, fine. I'm not going to get into that. But there's so many other facets that need to be discussed. Oh, okay, as a woman, do I know that I can say no? I can request that a man wear a condom before we have sex. Like, there's so many conversations that are not being taken into factor when we discuss reproductive rights. Because by the time that baby's coming, there has like 15 steps before you get there.
100%.
Like, there's so many things you have to do. You have to get to that point, right? There's the issue of consent, because sometimes that baby comes and you did not consent for that baby to come.
And can we talk about that for a minute? Because having taught for over 10 years in secondary schools, one of the things that comes up is whether parents, guardians, are okay with sex education happening. And all of the difficulties around when parents or guardians are like, no, we don't want our child to have that. And being in a room with, across genders in the classroom, but seeing the disparity between knowledge, actual factual scientific knowledge, and just hearsay. It's like, oh wow, that's what you know. And coming to an understanding that a lot of the boys that I taught just had the least amount of factual information and were the most bewildered, but the least likely to go and ask for that information. And there's I think, even though there's more to be done with girls, I think there's a heck of a lot to be done with boys in terms of sexual education, so that they are better informed and equipped. And I think there are a lot of boys who don't want to end up in the situations that they end up in, but frankly don't really know any better. And then they find themselves in a situation that is too big for them, and they don't know what to do. Then there's shame in there, as well as panic. And then they're just like, all hands off, I don't know what to do. And then, number one, I will brand you as a terrible person because you did this thing. You did this thing to the girl, because now it's an attachment of a type of person and a sort of behavior, done to. She's a done to and you're a doer. There's something in there. And then you're walking around with that. What does that create in terms of patterns of behavior?
But I think as well, one of the dynamics that we have to acknowledge is that from the top down, it's men. So when we think about education, and we think about how education is formed, it's essentially white men who are creating curriculums generally, in a general sense. And so when parents are fearful about not just sex education, but education generally, I think it's very valid, because it's different if you've got teachers who are whole people trying to facilitate education in a way that is holistic and healthy. But then the same men that are clueless about women's bodies are facilitating some of these education sessions. So the biases are still alive and well in these sessions that are being delivered.
There's that argument, sis, but there's also an issue around us constantly peddling that education is school. Education is my family, is my home. And in your family and your home, when you had the sex education, what actually was it?
Is there a culture element?
There is definitely a cultural element. My parents sat us down to talk about, I can't remember how old we were, but they did sit us down. But the conversation that we had was very kind of limited. I think it was about as much as they could really cope with. But it's like, very often what happens in society is people say there's this stuff that's going to happen in school and it's not quite right, and they shouldn't do that, and we go to don't do it because it's not going to be how I want it, but we don't meet the deficit at home.
Exactly.
Right. And then give that education that we're wanting.
And also, but also it's scientific education, right? So it's like you have a biology textbook and I am telling you like what physically, like biologically happens. It's fact. So like...
I think that's so. My issue with the whole sex being taught solely as a biological process, I think is problematic. I've worked in informal education here, America, Germany, different places, and the way they facilitate learning about sex is really interesting. In Germany, for example, there's a whole emotional framework and context that is taught alongside physical sex ed. But I think, I haven't worked in education for a while, but what I've seen here is very much scientific, very much factual processes. And there's this kind of erasure of, you may do this physically, but emotionally, spiritually, or whatever else, there's all these components that are happening.
It has gotten better
but people don't want to talk about those things, right? Because it's going to be what you were saying, that, oh, you have people who might peddle their own views onto your child.
Yes.
Exactly, ideologies onto your child. So it's like a catch-22, right? They have to teach
I think
something.
there's ways to make space for conversation, as opposed to, it's different if I'm teaching you versus I'm making space as an educator for this conversation to happen. But I think that psychology would teach that actually when you talk about things like consent, when you think about how those concepts come about, it's not necessarily scientific, it's to do with thought processes, feelings, emotions. And so there is a basis for those things that is quite robust. Do you know what I mean? It's not just airy-fairy, my perspective versus your perspective. Actually, there's research on some of these things. And so I think that is a valid part. But I think from what I've seen of British education, a lot of that was missing from what I was seeing.
So it's been gradually introduced, and different types of schools work in different ways. But there is still an opt-out, as in we will notify, the school will notify, from when we last did it, when I was at a school, will notify parents that this is about to happen, and parents can opt out, which is an interesting thing in itself. I think, there's questions around whether that should be optional or not, but it's sitting in a room looking at consent and over a number of different scenarios with young people and hearing the things that they came out with in a safe space is incredibly fascinating, because you start to see all the holes and you can see where those holes lead to, as in like the problematic scenarios that are going to come up, because had we not talked about this now, you would have thought that was okay. And we talk about young people when we talk about consent and sexual education, but it's not a young people's issue. It's a people issue. Most of us still need a heck of a lot of sex education. That's part of our reproductive rights. We don't know. When you were talking about luteal phase and all that, and you were saying men have no idea, women have no idea. We have no idea how our bodies work. Beyond the basic.
It's tragic, because
what
you're
we
talking
get.
about...
And that's the thing, right? So I come from Kenya. In Kenya, there's no sex ed. There's absolutely, like, from a Christian perspective, they believe in abstinence, which is, I won't even get into it. But there is no sex education. I don't know about other countries.
It's the same thing.
There's zero. And biology, you can opt out of learning biology, right, in high school. So you don't have to learn biology. And generally, because Africa, like Kenya, is more science-based, people will take like physics and chemistry over biology anyway. So now you have a gender disparity. Women are doing biology. They'll understand their own reproductive health systems, but then men are not doing biology. So they have no idea about any form of reproductive health knowledge, right? And then you're just leaving these people to go into the world and telling them they must abstain until they get married. And then not teaching anything, even just basic, how does your body work? How does her body work? Is just, so for me, it's even just the basic, like everybody must sit down, we must understand factually. Because even you can see on social media, people don't even understand factually. No. Like, where do women urinate from, babes? Like,
yes.
Guys, please.
But this is the thing. It's like if we at home don't teach it, if we at school don't teach it, the things that we learn are fake things. We don't learn the truth.
Then you learn from your peers, and then it becomes misinformation and
so much
disinformation.
misinformation.
And then it becomes like, oh, but boys should do this. And then it becomes like peer pressure on each other. And then even girls have their own peer pressure on each other. So I think there has to be at least basic understanding. Like, just for everybody's understanding, just know what happens in each other's bodies and your own body. So that from there, people can make informed decisions about reproductive health. Right? Because you're coming from a place of knowledge and not a place of assumption or disinformation or misinformation.
And I think the thing around reproductive health as well is having some education around things that seem irregular. I think there's so much that happens. I'll speak for women, but I think it happens with boys as well, around things that when things don't function the way that the norm does. Don't look the way the norm does, and you kind of like think you end up in this like space of body shame, whereas actually yours is a norm. Some women bleed for 6 months, for example, and these girls are in school and they'll think, oh God, I'm so strange, but not talk about it. I went to school with various different. I went to a girls' school, so I've experienced different types of behaviours and whatever, but it was only in my late 30s that I sat down with a girl that I'd gone to school with, and she was talking to me about the fact that she has endometriosis. And I, from my own experience of fibroids, had come around information about endometriosis. My God, when the girl told me she had endometriosis, I was like, that's what it was this whole time at school. When you were being she was just a lot. She was all over the place. She would be quite difficult. The girl was in ridiculous amounts of pain.
Suffering.
Her hormones were all over the place. She felt like she was going crazy. We experienced her that way. But in that time and at that time, our perception of her was that she was some kind of like difficult person who was just, it's like, this is what women go through.
Stuff happening.
Where your body's doing a lot and your behaviors are explainable, but you don't know how to explain them.
So when we go back to the topic of like contraception, so as a woman, you're given different options and then you like try a few things. I tried one when I was in university and it made me a crazy person. And I didn't know how to explain, or I didn't understand at that time that, okay, these things have different effects on different people. So my friends legitimately thought I was a crazy person. But I'm like, and it's like you see yourself being crazy, but you can't stop yourself being crazy because your body is doing something that you can't understand. And if that conversation, that knowledge is not had, then you feel shame. You're like, oh my God, how could I do that? How could I say that? Yes. I was in so much pain. I was confused. I had so many hormones going through my body, but there's no space for that. There's no space for that conversation. And then people just label you as somebody who's...
That is a huge gripe for me when you think about the data around women's health in terms of modern medicine. The research just isn't there. The logic is we don't do research on women's bodies because your bodies fluctuate too much. Add to that the dynamic of being black women. The data for our bodies, it's non-existent. So how then can we go to a GP and a GP says, try this like it's Skittles or
literally, exactly.
It's horrendous. So when we are talking about reproductive health and reproductive rights, yes, I agree there ought to be space for the education. But then the other component of that is, where is that information coming from? I'm thinking about rudimentary things like the uterus, the graphs that we have about the uterus and the ovaries. And it's all neatly presented, your ovaries here, your ovaries.
It's not that.
Your ovaries are floating around. They're floating around doing what they want to do. Everything is congested and compressed. It's not a spacious environment. But what we are told is, this is a neat diagram. So if these are things that are being propagated and ideas that are being propagated, as much as we're talking about information and possessing knowledge and having the education,
it's the type of knowledge that's being shared is also important.
Okay.
And can I add just one more
Yes.
thing?
Yes.
I promise this is the last thing of this one. We're juicing this fruit. The other thing is also that Men should understand what the reproductive rights are, particularly in the scenario that you brought there around black women. Black women are 5 times more likely to die in childbirth in this country. 5 times. And if their partner has a limited understanding of what her reproductive rights are and also what his rights are as the parent in that room, and what they can say yes to and what they can say no to. That's one of the most, and how to advocate. Because very often we're not sure what we can say no to, and there's a lot that we can say no to, and to say, actually, this is my birthing plan, this is how I want it. And they can say, well, we think it's good that you think, keep thinking and do this.
It's needed.
I'm deciding.
But it's that thing, isn't it, as women showing up as everything, and even in the birthing room, still being present of mind enough to self-advocate. When actually, we are our most vulnerable in that point. The man who caused this, I'm joking. But the man that is,
your partner
should be able to advocate for you.
Absolutely.
But they very often don't know
what to say or what to do, what they can and can't advocate for.
And that's some scary stuff.
That is, yeah, honestly. I am enjoying it. Honestly, this is
talk about it all day.
Great. So moving on. Women who prioritize their careers over family are judged unfairly. You could have all of them.
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, let's start with you, Pido.
So I think the obvious answer is to go outwards in, but I'm going to go inwards out. I think we judge ourselves unfairly as women. I think we've absorbed a lot of messaging that means that oftentimes when we are prioritizing career or education, particularly when you get to a certain age and you haven't had children, you start to be like, oh wait, have I made a mistake? Oh wait, am I doing the wrong thing? And I think there's a lot of guilt and shame that gets attached to that. I think this point about what a woman is, not purely an incubator of a seed, what a woman's function is, whether we are even supposed to be measured by function, is something that I think many women wrestle with constantly, whether they are staunch feminists or not. I think irrespective, it's something that we wrestle with constantly. I think even if it was just if it was just a mental struggle, that would be one thing. But physiologically, our bodies are doing things that are telling us that we're supposed to be having a kid.
Not always. So some women don't get that. So going back to the question, right? Not all women want to have children. They can get married and they prioritize their careers, but they're seen so negatively. But maybe they just never had that feeling of like, oh, they just never caught that, what they call it, the baby fever. It was just never there. Like it was just never part of, so you can't say that it's part of who they are.
But I think
because
that's
some women don't
like
feel that.
the body's function.
If the body is functioning in that way, then hormonally speaking, our systems are flooded. And whichever part of our reproductive story we're at, whether that's in our childbearing years or whether we're in the perimenopause or menopausal, there's different points where our bodies are dealing with different hormonal shifts.
Yeah, if you're ovulating, the function of ovulation is the push. Whether your psyche marries up to that and is in agreement is something else.
I can tell you of one particular occasion. In that period of time, I know that my body was going nuts. She was like, "Do it now! Do it now! Can you hear me?" And I was sat, and I'd been feeling this way. I was super broody. And I was living abroad at the time, working. And I do want children, so that's not the question, but I was really broody, but it wasn't a here thing, it was a here thing. I was like, damn, okay, this is a real thing. And I remember being sat at this restaurant with some friends, And I was like, no, this is really real, because I was breaking into a sweat looking at these children running around, and I was like, oh my God.
Take one.
Okay, so real talk, I'm not even lying. I literally turned to my friend, I was like, we need to leave because I feel like I need to take one. And he was like, what? And I was like, I don't know how else to say this to you. Get me out of this restaurant now, because I'm trying to have a baby and clearly I can't. So we need to go. I was like, wait, damn. We're on a spectrum of experience when it comes to this thing around wanting to or needing to have children. And I think at that time, my body was like, hey sis, so about that thing. You've waited a while. Do you want to? So I think there's an internal pressure as well that happens that we don't always talk about, because I think sometimes we talk about it externally, what people pressure onto us, but sometimes there's that internal conversation of, gosh, and also, God, if I don't do it now, will I be able to? Will the quality be good? And maybe he's here right now, so
Maybe I should
just do it now. So many women have done it now because of the clock, not because he was the right one.
And then they're tied to this creature for
18 years. 18 years. But yeah, I think also women are judged so harshly if they just come out and say, I don't want kids.
Absolutely.
They're judged so harshly. They're like, what is your function?
Unnatural.
Like, why are you here? Like, what is your purpose if you don't want children and to reproduce? We are people. We are holistic people. I can just want to exist in this timeline and just float through existence. Why is that so hard? Women are judged so harshly for being like a CEO. You could be like a high-flying businesswoman or whatever. You could even just be a stay-at-home wife and you don't want children, and everybody will be like, why don't you, like, what's wrong with you? Like, you're not fulfilling like your womanly purpose. Like, you were put on this earth to reproduce, so why are you not fulfilling your purpose? And it's like,
But I think that is more, at times, more mothering than I want to have a child for myself. I want a child that looks like me. Actually, when you look at the landscape of mankind in this present day, you want to bring a person into this.
Right?
And being considerate enough to say, actually, I don't know if that's the best thing for any child that I would have. So I'm choosing, like, that is honorable too.
exactly. We're on the verge of climate catastrophe. Like, just having like consideration that maybe you don't want to bring a child into this. And also there's the option of their children. If I have that nurturing feeling, there are other children I can nurture. You can be an auntie, you can be, a carer within a community, or you can adopt. So there are options, but the core value that society puts on women is that if you just don't want to birth a child, it's like, oh my God.
Also, there's something around that this is where the accountability conversation comes in again, because as we move through progress, let's say, and we've been taking on different types of careers that require us to go through education for a certain number of years, to do an apprenticeship, to do a whatever, I can't do that. I probably could, because women are freaking amazing. With babies, I can't do that. So I need to focus on this thing in order to get to this point. And financially, I'll be in a better position once I'm there to then be able to partner with you to have children. But there's a cost there, isn't there? Because then you're saying to me, oh, you should have done it by now. It's like, but wait, you and I were both going to school at the same time.
Right?
And we've been, do you remember when you were studying and I was studying? Do you remember when you were doing, we've done this, you wanted me to do that and have a baby. Like the maths doesn't math.
Also, women martyr themselves for motherhood, and I just, you feel like you have to do everything and just be this super person, and you're a mother and a teacher and a student, and you're writing your you don't have to. You don't have to martyr yourself for motherhood. I think it's the losing
of self that is highly problematic.
Exactly. Is it because we saw our parents do it, or is it because society expects that from us?
I think it's because there's a lot to do. There's a lot to do. And so in terms of, when you think about it, you've got a whole person that you're trying to prepare for the world, and you're trying to keep them alive, and you're trying to make sure they're happy. And all of these needs, you're not, people talk about balancing. You're not balancing, you're juggling. You have to let go of one thing before you can hold the next. And so there has to be space chiseled out where you can turn up as yourself. And I think there's a lot to be said for who we are choosing, because when the clock is ticking, for a lot of women, reason and logic goes out of the window. But in my mind, if you're looking to reproduce, it's so sterile a term, but who are you looking to do you want this man to be your advocate? Do you want this man to be your partner?
Do you want this man to be reproduced?
No, that is a valid. That's a valid question. Do you want your children to either grow up and choose a man like this, or do you want your sons to be men like this? Exactly. Those are valid questions. And if we're not asking them, and all we're thinking about is I need a mini-me, there's a problem. There's a problem. There's a problem. And I think when you were talking about are we judged harshly? I think my thing is heuristics and judgment, it's part and parcel of the human experience. And so it's going to happen whether it's harsh, proportional or otherwise. But I think there's the other component of knowing that it's going to happen. Sometimes you just have to disregard it. Sometimes it's easier said than done, but that whole thing of reconciling to self, that actually for some people, I'm a villain. I'm okay with that. For some people...
Ideally, there wouldn't be a villainization. There would be an adjustment of the system in which we exist. Because what's happening is women are competing with men professionally and educationally, so that we're coming out with the same or better outcomes. But our systems, I'll explain why I'm saying that. Our systems don't function that way. And I think a lot of women who do want to have children, let's speak on those, but choose not to, there's a thinking around, if I do this now, if I do it right now, I'm going to lose all this good work that I've done. Or when I come back, these people won't take me as seriously. Or I'm going to have to juggle and I'm not sure how to do that. Whereas if the system wasn't so punitive of women taking time out, if the system wasn't so punitive of women when they came back, I've been in an environment where a head of department was head of department when they left. When they came back, they were not given head of department. And I was like, wait, that's discrimination. That there's laws against
that. What
were
they given?
They were given assistant. Assistant.
So having a child meant that their experience and their knowledge base just evaporated.
Yeah.
And these are the things. These are the things that they're deterrents, right? And I think in some cases, women who do want to have children will delay it because they want to establish some real solid foundation and reputation. I need you to know how freaking good I am at this. And I'm going to burn myself out doing it. I'm going to work so hard you can never doubt me. So hard. Better. Black women, next level again. So by the time I'm even deciding to step out, I'm going to come back in my same role and you can't argue it because I've got this legacy, right? I think there's that. So for me, it feels like there needs to be a change in the system so that there isn't this punishing, professional or educational punishing of women if they choose to come out of the system to do this thing and then they want to come back in. You shouldn't go down because there's things you need to juggle, but your knowledge is the same.
I think I was just disagreeing with the part that women are in competition. I don't think it's a competition. I just think that to have the same opportunity in the same field of work, you have to work twice as hard.
It's systemic composition.
Exactly.
That's what
so
I mean.
I'm not
yeah.
trying it to be the best in my class. No, I have to be. So that if I go to an interview and there's me against him, I have to have like 3, 4, 5 times more qualification to get the same job.
Yeah.
Probably be paid less than him with more experience and with more knowledge.
Yeah.
So it's like I have to kill myself to get a job because I need to exist. Because if I do want children, I have to be able to financially support myself, right? Because partnering is tricky. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but you are bringing this child into the world and you're taking that responsibility. So you have to set yourself up in a particular way. But you just always killing yourself to be able just to do the bare minimum, just to exist in a society that should allow you to just be.
But then that's the thing, isn't it? It should, but we know it doesn't. Exactly. So then when we are trying to create these spaces, but we're still trying to work within these frameworks, are we not just doomed to fail? Is there a way to step out of the system?
I think it's systemic. It's stepping out of the system. Okay, and I'm going to go back to capitalism, guys, because that's the system in which we live in, right? We have no choice. To step out of the existing system is to be removed from the financial safety, from the things that you would require to happily exist and raise that child holistically.
Is it though? Because when we consider
Let me finish, right? There are spaces in which, let's say, you want to go off the grid and create your own community, but it still requires some form of capital to be able to have that community. I read an article about a Black community that, like in the US, and they set up their own systems and schooling, but they still required money to buy that land and build those things. So it's like, to be outside sounds great, but you still have to opt in somehow to be able to extract.
Yeah, I'm not denying that at
Yeah.
all. The framework is capitalism. You have to have capital in order to achieve stuff. But what I think I'm saying is the framework that we have is you're working within an organization, you're working within some kind of body wherein the policies and procedures are set for that thing. And so you're going in and you're seeking essentially approval within those frameworks. So in my mind, I'm looking at people like the lady that established the Avalon Village, where it's like, okay, that is not a safe space for me. I'm going to create a safe space. And if it means having to buy into capitalism, I set my terms on how I do that.
Which is a limited resource in itself, because there are certain types of people or groups that have greater access to that than as an option than others. So for example, if you come from the average, I'm going to say not all, but the average migrant family that's, let's say, come to England, there's a whole other dynamic there, whereas you are coming, so for example, my parents came, they didn't come as rich people, they came as poor people trying to build a life. So there's a legacy there in terms of capital.
They're building it within this framework, and I think
building it within this framework, but they don't have that. They don't have the capital to be able to. So they would be a group that didn't have the capital to do this project, for example. And in addition to that, these types of groups are coming to the country and starting off as people in poverty, and also with people in poverty that are still relying and pulling. I need this. Can you send for so-and-so past, so-and-so's in hospital? So it's that. And because of that, they stay in systems because that's the easiest way to build capital. And so they work 10 times, 20 times harder because the route outward and those other possibilities aren't available. Whatever little capital we have it's not even a my thing, it's always we.
But I think there's a difference between simple and easy. And I think it's simple, being able to have a job that is stable, going into work and knowing that at the end of the month, you're not looking at overheads and expenditure, and you're able to say, by the end of the month, this is what I have. It's the simplest way. But I think of people that I've had the privilege of being in the room with, they took huge risks, but they didn't have children. So the risks that they were taking impacted them.
Yeah.
And as black women, they were able to say, okay, I had a business that's failing. I'm going to take the capital. I'm going to go into oil. And okay, that's worked. How else can I move laterally or however to then gain more capital? But then they're teaching their children. And they're looking at their community and they're saying, okay, you seem like you have good business acumen. Come, let me teach you too. And I think about these, you think about a lot of these English families that are in situations whereby they have wealth, and so their children have wealth and their children's children have wealth. Those things are something that we as Africans, as black folk, haven't had the opportunity to tap into. But I feel like we need to learn somehow.
Yeah.
Because I think in some spaces, I'm going to
yeah,
caveat that because there's
exactly.
that narrative is very, it's so finite and it's so narrow because lots of black and African people do have wealth. And when we go back to the continent, I don't know where the red one's falling, like that's a lie. And I suppose it's also how we define wealth. But I've encountered wealth within our communities and generational wealth. And I think there's a slight disadvantage in those of us that migrate, because oftentimes we're starting from scratch.
Your wealth doesn't translate.
It doesn't.
Across. So
It
the
doesn't.
cost of value in one country and value in another is not the same.
Yeah. And so
Exactly. You always have to build up. And also there's a thing about Western culture that make you have to work for things so hard.
Pay your dues.
Exactly. As a person of color, as a woman of color, they're like, no, you have to work hard. I need to see you work hard.
Sweat.
Yeah, sweat. So I see that you deserve access to capital. I see that you deserve access to these opportunities.
Do you know how to count?
Please, let me hear your English. Is it clean enough? Is
that
it
an accent?
Exactly.
So well articulate.
Where did you learn English?
Oh, you speak really well.
Exactly.
I love talking to you.
Exactly. And even when you look at the statistics of like how much money is spent on startups run by women, let alone black women, it's like finite. So there is a cap and there is a ceiling, and we have to acknowledge that. And yes, we can want to create parallel systems. And maybe back home, it's much easier to create parallel systems because you have that historic wealth. You have land that you can go back to. You see a lack of red tape. You have that land that you can go back to and be like, let me work with this. Let me see what I can do with this. But in the West, you always start at a disadvantage.
Can I add one more thing to that as well? Because you said it beautifully. You talked about families and generational wealth. And if we go back home, it's that communal living. It's our wealth. And it's that. The second we start to individuate, it's like, okay, I'm taking all the risk on myself. I can't, that's really hard to do.
You're right, it makes me think about, I'm not sure what they call it in other cultures, but I know for my parents, for their parents, they had this thing called, partner. And so our communal way of being was what allowed them to buy houses.
In Notting Hill was built,
Ladies, I am enjoying the conversation, but I'm just going to have to cut it short because of time. Yeah. Well, neighbors, I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. These ladies were passionate about everything. Amazing. Honestly, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. So how can we get a hold of you? Any social media they have?
Shanoa Dove on Instagram and Facebook.
So you will find me on LinkedIn as P.Tampa. On Instagram, I have 3 accounts. So for coaching, I'm on PT Plays Coach. For general creative works, I'm on PT Plays. And for the Women's Circle, I am at Wisdom's Village.
For me, I'm available on LinkedIn as Lynn Lioba. I am also available on Instagram as Lynn_Chebet. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, neighbors, for staying with us until now. Remember to like, share, subscribe. Until next time, bye.
Bye.